What if I told you that one of the most dangerous criminals in Canada never fired a weapon, never orchestrated a violent heist, and never even raised his voice in public? That instead, his deadliest weapon was a cheap home printer and an obsession with perfection? In the underworld of white-collar crime, one man quietly climbed to infamy, not by force, but by finesse. He didn't break into vaults or mastermind bank robberies. No, this man walked past security cameras and metal detectors every day, completely unnoticed, because he wasn't stealing money. He was creating it. This is the almost unbelievable story of how a soft-spoken computer geek from a quiet town in Ontario raveled the foundation of Canada's financial system, flooding it with counterfeit cash so flawless it fooled even the banks. But the question is, how long can a ghost stay invisible before someone finally sees the outline? Wesley Weber wasn't born a criminal. In fact, he was the kind of kid who seemed invisible for all the right and wrong reasons. Born in 1974 in the sleepy suburb of River Canard, near Windsor, Ontario, Wesley had a relatively uneventful childhood. His parents were supportive, middle-class folks who believed their quiet son would one day grow into something respectable. And he might have, if life didn't twist in the direction it did. Wesley didn't do well with people. He was the kind of teen who got swallowed in crowds, too socially awkward to connect, too introverted to impress. While other kids played sports or flirted in hallways, Wesley had only one true companion, his computer. In its blinking cursor and cascading lines of code, he found control, order, logic. In the digital world, he could build anything and no one could laugh at him there. But what begins as harmless isolation can sometimes brew darker ambitions. At 16, Wesley decided he didn't want to be invisible anymore. Alongside a friend, he pulled off a bold stunt breaking into his own high school and stealing a fortune in computer equipment. The newspapers blamed Detroit thieves. The truth? Two awkward teens desperate for attention. The heist made him a local legend. Suddenly, he was someone, and that feeling, that rush, never left him. In the years that followed, Wesley dipped his toes into increasingly dangerous waters. He began forging IDs, welfare cards, insurance documents. At first, it was about proving he could do it. Then it became about profit. He even faked gift certificates. The authorities finally caught up with him in 1997, sentencing him to 3 months in jail. But jail didn't rehabilitate Wesley. It educated him. Upon release, he pivoted into a lifestyle that danced between the shadows of legality, growing marijuana in the basement of his home, petty theft, small-time scams. Even when one operation failed, he was already brainstorming the next. House arrest and 240 hours of community service only reinforced one thing in Wesley's mind. If he was going to break the law, he needed to break it smarter. And that's when the most dangerous idea of all hit him. Why steal money when you could make it? Wesley had tried printing fake bills before, back when he was younger, $10s and $20s mostly, but they were obvious fakes. Now, he wanted to take it further. He wasn't after pocket change anymore. He wanted to recreate the Canadian $100 bill right down to its most intricate security features. This wasn't just about money. This was about mastery. At first, his attempts were laughable. The colors were off, the ink smudged. Under UV light, they glowed when they shouldn't have. And the biggest giveaway? The foil security stripe real bills had it. His didn't. But Wesley wasn't the kind to give up after a bad draft. He began dissecting the real thing like a scientist. He studied every curve, every shimmer, every thread woven into the paper. He read everything he could on ink technologies, paper density, optical foils. Most people wouldn't notice the subtle shine that differentiated real money from fake. Wesley did, and he became obsessed with recreating it. He contacted vendors across Canada and the U.S., pretending to be a legitimate businessman from a fake company he called Pro Custom Graphics. With charm and confidence, he acquired exactly what he needed, the same kind of ink, foil, and paper blends used in government printing. Oddly, he didn't use industrial machines. He stuck with his off-the-shelf inkjet printer. Why? Because it produced better fakes than the high-end commercial gear? It was precise, subtle, almost too perfect. But even a genius can't run an empire alone. Wesley recruited 3 trusted allies to join his operation, handpicked for their discipline and skill. First came Dustin, in charge of applying the sensitive optical foil so delicate that one wrong move would ruin a batch. Then came Ryan Houdair, whose job was to apply a specialized clear coat to each bill, sealing the ink while making the paper feel authentic to the touch. Finally, there was Anthony Cabriel, a logistical mind who coordinated operations and quality checks. The 4 of them formed a seamless unit. Their process was a masterpiece of crime. They began with ultra-high resolution scans of real $100 bills, tweaking brightness, sharpness, saturation, and color. When that wasn't enough, they calibrated each print by hand, inspecting every pixel for errors. They printed the fronts and backs separately, and carefully applied the optical foils in a dimly lit basement lab to avoid reflections. The clear coat came last, giving the bills that smooth texture real money has after it's been touched and exchanged. But there was still one problem. Real money doesn't come off a printer looking brand new. It circulates, it creases, it wears down. So Wesley, ever the perfectionist, threw bundles of fake $100 bills into a closed dryer filled with clay poker chips. After 11 minutes of tumbling, the bills emerged looking slightly worn, just enough to pass the casual glance of cashiers and bank tellers. They began testing the notes in local stores. The results? Flawless. Not one clerk suspected a thing. Encouraged, the team scaled up. Their new high-speed hydraulic paper cutter allowed them to produce $100,000 in a single batch. The money looked so good, so authentic, that even trained eyes were fooled. But the cash didn't just change their bank accounts, it changed them. Flush with fake millions, Wesley and his team began living like royalty. They'd bought luxury cars, designer watches, and flashy clothes. Wesley, in particular, became addicted to the lifestyle. He'd stay awake for 20 hours at a time, spending, shopping, chasing the high of being untouchable. And then came the car. The Mustang Cobra wasn't just a car, it was Wesley's crown. Custom rims, slick detailing, high-end parts. It was his throne on wheels. But when he tried to pay for the rims with fake bills that had the same serial number printed on them, the dealer raised an eyebrow. Then he raised the alarm. That one mistake, a minor oversight caused by pride and greed, was all it took to tear down years of precision. The dealer called authorities. When police examined the bills and realized multiple notes shared the exact same serial numbers, the red flags went up instantly. An investigation was launched. surveillance teams began tracking Wesley and his crew. For the first time, they were being hunted, and the crew could feel it. They began switching phones, taking random U-turns, looking over their shoulders, but they couldn't stop printing. The fake bills were in demand. They were now too deep to pull out. Wesley, once a ghost in the system, was now being followed. And still, he kept going. But the clock was ticking ... By the fall of 2000, Wesley Weber's operation was on fire figuratively and almost literally. The crew was moving tens of thousands of dollars in fake bills through stores, gas stations, and even casinos. The counterfeit notes were circulating so widely, so invisibly, that even federal banks unknowingly accepted them. In the eyes of law enforcement, this wasn't a scam anymore. It was economic warfare. But Weber had grown reckless. The very perfection that made him brilliant was also his downfall. He was no longer thinking like a criminal, he was thinking like a king, untouchable, invincible. And so, while authorities built their case slowly and silently, Wesley flaunted his wealth. He wasn't hiding. He was speeding around town in a customized Mustang Cobra, shopping like a man who believed there was no tomorrow. For him, tomorrow was already paid for, but the law never moves in a straight line. It waits, it watches, it gathers. Authorities had now linked the counterfeit bills with identical serial numbers to Wesley. It was more than suspicion. It was a trail. Now all they needed was proof. They watched the crew. Every move, every meeting, every careless word whispered over a tapped phone. The surveillance was tight, the tension suffocating. But what made the situation more dangerous was that Wesley and his crew knew they were being watched, and it made them paranoid. They stopped driving normally. They'd randomly change direction, pull over, wait, drive off again. One of them even started using 3 different prepaid phones in a single day to avoid detection. They weren't just running a criminal enterprise anymore. They were running from shadows. And yet, they still kept printing money. The bills were just too perfect. So perfect, in fact, that word had gotten around. Criminals from other cities wanted in. Some wanted to distribute. Others wanted their own batches printed. The counterfeiting crew was no longer operating like a quiet unit. It was a full-scale syndicate. To meet the rising demand, they upgraded their equipment. Better printers, faster cutters, new software that could produce sharper, more realistic detail on each bill. They were printing so much, so fast, it was like they were daring the government to catch them. But the greed never stops. It multiplies. The team had started churning out hundreds of thousands in a single week. They were mimicking the very system they sought to cheat. Deadlines, quotas, production targets. They were no longer just making fake money. They were running a counterfeit central bank. Still, Wesley wasn't satisfied. The more he had, the more he wanted. He began buying more cars, more clothes, upgrading electronics he hadn't even unboxed yet. And despite the risks, he didn't slow down, not even after spotting an unmarked sedan parked too long on his street. This wasn't about getting rich anymore. This was about domination. But then the silence broke. October 2000, a date seared into the memory of every Canadian officer involved in the operation. The investigation team, after months of watching, listening, collecting evidence, finally had what they needed. The timing had to be perfect. The moment they struck, they had to catch Wesley and his crew in the act printing, handling, packaging counterfeit bills. No more speculation, just undeniable truth. The raid was swift, brutal, surgical. Authorities descended on the printing location like a hurricane. Armed with warrants backed by months of airtight intel, they burst through the doors and froze the room, and what they found stunned even the most seasoned officers. Stacks of counterfeit $100 bills littered the room, some fresh off the printer, some bundled for transport, others still tumbling in a drier, mid-aging process. The air smelled like ink and melted polymer. Machines hummed, papers fluttered, and four stunned men stared back in disbelief, caught not only red-handed, but practically mid-print. It was a jackpot bust. More than $250,000 in fake $100s was seized that day. But it wasn't just the bills, it was the proof of mass production, the special inks, the foil application tools, the software, the templates. This wasn't a scam. This was an operation. Wesley and his crew didn't even try to run. They were arrested on the spot. Two of them still had gold paint on their hands, residue from applying foil to the notes. That visual, that final detail would haunt Wesley for years. How close they had gotten to perfection, ... and how fast it all unraveled. Once in custody, the truth came out quickly. Authorities had more than enough to build a case, but they wanted confessions, and they got them. Wesley pled guilty. His partners, Dustin, Ryan, and Anthony, all cooperated, hoping for reduced sentences, and they got them. Each of the three men received 2 years in prison. Wesley, the mastermind, was hit with 5. But what he'd built, the damage he had done, echoed far beyond prison bars. The Canadian economy had been unknowingly soaked in fake currency. Retailers, restaurants, cab drivers, casinos, anyone who touched a $100 bill was potentially holding Wesley Weber's work, and it was flawless. So flawless, in fact, that Canadian police colleges began using Wesley's bills in training to show recruits what perfect counterfeit looked like. He'd gone from computer nerd to criminal to curriculum. Even behind bars, Wesley's mind didn't stop moving. 5 years inside only gave him time to plan. He read about finance, about markets, about digital currencies and online consulting firms. And when he walked out of prison in August 2006, he wasn't looking to return to forgery. He was looking to level up. He moved to Richmond Hill, Ontario, started a phone business. On the surface, it looked legit. But people who knew Wesley knew better. He was scouting, plotting, mapping the next system to break. This time, it wasn't paper money he wanted to conquer. It was the digital world. Wesley Weber walked out of prison like a man reborn, but not redeemed. He had spent 5 years behind bars, but he didn't emerge humbled. He emerged sharper, hungrier. He hadn't wasted those years pacing a cell. He had been studying, absorbing, learning every inch of the financial markets. If counterfeiting had been his first masterpiece, his next venture would be even bolder. Only this time it wouldn't involve printers. It would involve pixels. Back in Ontario, Wesley kept a low profile at first. He opened a phone shop, nothing flashy, just enough to appear legitimate. But it wasn't about phones. It was about building a front, a foothold. He was already planning his next move. He knew paper currency was dying. The future was digital. And Wesley wasn't about to be left behind. That's when he launched his next project, a consulting firm called Goldbridge Financial Incorporated. But something was off from the start. The firm wasn't registered. It operated in a gray space, offering unregulated financial advice, pitching high-return investments with zero oversight. To Wesley, regulation was just another system to bend. He wanted back into the world of big money. He wanted speed, volume, influence, and more than anything, he wanted to move cash in ways that no government could trace, which led him to cryptocurrency. Wesley co-founded a digital currency startup called Cryptex, a platform for trading and storing crypto assets. He kept his name out of the spotlight this time. Officially, the company was co-founded by his wife, Michelle Cam, but anyone who looked close enough could see his fingerprints all over it. Wesley didn't just want to trade crypto. He wanted to own the rails. Knowing his criminal record would raise red flags, he tried something cunning. He attempted to list the company publicly under an alias Wesley Cam. It was a bold trick, almost genius, almost, until the Ontario Securities Commission caught on. In 2011, the OSC discovered Wesley was not only trading without authorization, he was operating under a ban that explicitly prohibited him from dealing in securities. When the truth surfaced, Wesley pleaded guilty. Again. This time he was sentenced to 90 days in jail and slapped with 2 years of probation. Most people would have stopped. Most people would have taken the hint, but Wesley wasn't most people. He was addicted not just to money, but to beating the system. And if crypto couldn't give him that high, maybe cannabis could. Remember Wesley's early marijuana bust? That small-time grow-op that got him house arrest years ago? He never forgot it. And when Canada began shifting toward legal marijuana, Wesley saw an opening, not for weed, for ownership. In 2017, under the alias Jeff Murray, Wesley stood before Toronto City councillors, giving polished, persuasive arguments about how cannabis regulations should be handled. He wasn't some stoner in a hoodie. He wore a suit, spoke like a corporate executive, and they listened. A year later, after Canada legalized recreational marijuana, Wesley announced that he had helped finance a new chain of cannabis stores called CAFA. But a CBC investigation uncovered the truth. Wesley didn't just finance CAFA. He owned it, quietly, completely. His wife Michelle was listed as the company's director. Wesley was the shadow CEO. It was a legal business, on paper, but in practice, Wesley was playing the same game he always played, dancing on the edge of law and legitimacy, pushing boundaries, testing just how far he could go before someone stepped in. And he was winning. For a while, the man once branded Canada's most dangerous counterfeiter had clawed his way back to the top, this time without faking a single bill. But his name still lingered in dark corners. Authorities still watched, and his past refused to stay buried, because the bills he once printed were still out there. Years after the arrest, fake $100 notes identical to the ones Wesley designed kept surfacing. Some showed up in casinos, others in overseas banks. His legacy, quite literally, was still in circulation. But the biggest shock? Some of Wesley's counterfeit notes had made it into the vaults of Canada's central bank, stored, verified, and treated as real. That wasn't just a crime. That was a haunting. Wesley Weber didn't just cheat the system. He embarrassed it. He exposed how fragile it all really was, how even the most trusted currencies could be fooled by the right mind with the wrong morals. His $100 notes were so perfectly crafted that police academies began using them as teaching tools. New recruits were trained to spot his work. In a twisted way, Wesley had become part of the curriculum. His counterfeits didn't die when his operation was raided. They lived on. They were passed between hands, deposited in banks, counted by machines, and sometimes never caught at all. And Wesley knew it. He wasn't ashamed. He was proud. In one interview years later, someone asked if he regretted it. He gave a half smile and said, "I never had to pull a gun." That's more than some CEOs can say. That answer said everything. Wesley Weber wasn't just a criminal. He was a craftsman, a tactician, a man obsessed with building something so real it could fool the entire world, and he almost did. But the saddest part? He could have been anything. He had the intelligence, the discipline, the creativity to be a top designer, a security engineer, even a federal currency advisor. But he chose a different path, a darker one, because in the end, Wesley didn't want to serve the system. He wanted to outsmart it. He didn't want a paycheck. He wanted power. And he didn't just print fake money. He printed a legacy, one that bled into the veins of an entire nation, one counterfeit at a time.